Now, a far more interesting example is, of course, Tesla. And researching this and preparing this, it's very fascinating to see what Tesla has been doing, because by any definition, Tesla shouldn't be possible. We have a global car industry that's really good at what they're doing, i.e. producing old cars. So about 10 years ago, these 5 guys in Silicon Valley says, let's push the world into electric cars. It's not being done. Nobody else is really doing it. GM tried and then they canceled it, so nobody else is doing it. How hard can it really be? Age, 28, 32, 33, 41, 42. How hard can this be? It's only, the next generation of cars. And when they started in 2003, and notice where I put it. The idea of the Tesla Roadster, which was the performance sports car, was completely swinging for the fences. It was virtually impossible. And there were so many evidences to why this won't work. And they started selling it. They sold 200. And all of a sudden they realized, oops, there's a market. We have to figure out how to make it. They started making it. And they realized, oh, it's not really that hard. Well, we're getting the hang of it. And over a span of 3 years, Tesla Roadster became just another product that they managed to scope and scale and produce. And then they did something very interesting. They announced to the world, hey, we're going to do a Model S sedan. And then they stopped this. And for several months, nearly 3/4 of a year, Tesla didn't have any revenues at all. They had a few cars in Europe because they stopped producing and they stopped selling the Roadster. And then they had to figure out, oops, all right, so how do we get the Model S? They sold 6,500 and realized, oops, people are willing to pay for it. We have to figure out how to make it. And again, just imagine that on your company and see where it takes you. And they started making it. Oh, it's not really that hard. We're getting the hang of it. This is really cool. We're learning, and we're scaling. And over 15 months, they reduced production cost and production time by 40%. So that was pretty efficient. And they realized, oh, Model S is now our new core business. And then they announced, and you know this, we're going to make a van-like car. Then they ran into problems because they weren't making enough money. In fact, they weren't making money. This is 2 years ago. And they were starting to get desperate. Elon Musk had funded the company with whatever he had left of his personal wealth. Financial crisis. Banks weren't too happy. What would you do? What would be your new business model? How would you make revenue? Because you couldn't get money from the banks. You didn't really want to get new investors because they were all the old car companies. What would you do for making money here? What would be new business models? Bage? Yeah. And the combination of this, they started doing advanced technology licensing. They partnered up with several car companies, not as beggars, but as experts licensing their technology. And then they had another one. They realized that most of the car industry, they're polluting stuff. We're not. So we can actually sell our emission credits. Fast forward. Last quarter was the first ever quarter Tesla was profitable. In percent, how much of their revenue do you think came from the technology licensing? And I don't really expect you to have this answer, and you could Google it, but it's going to take you too long. 10%. Emission credits, how much came from that? 7%. So close to 20% of Tesla's revenue came from, not from the car, but from other things that they didn't really know they had. But when they got desperate, they also got more creative. And then, of course, they announced the Model X. And today there's a lot of discussion around, and also by Tesla, what's going to be next? How does Tesla continue to cycle through these business models? Because by now they have defined the Model S and that type of car, that family car, as their core business. Last year they produced just over 20,000 cars. This year they're going to produce 40,000 cars. In 2028 they're going to produce 500,000 cars. The question is, what do we do here? And what's happening now is that Tesla is seriously looking into, could we develop a global app store for the car industry? Because we know all cars are going to be like our car. It's just going to take longer. Could we become the Apple platform for electric cars? Advertising. We have these 2 iPad screens. How could we connect to local businesses and become the center of advertising? Battery swaps. Could we develop the technology that allows the rest of the industry to do battery swaps on our standard? And because the rest of the world couldn't produce enough batteries, so they're building the world's biggest battery factory themselves, and they're realizing, ooh, we have extra supply just like Amazon on the cloud. We can sell and become a leading supplier of batteries. We just haven't built a factory. How hard can it be, really? And this is where you're seeing Tesla today. And we're seeing now that this is sort of gliding down to becoming a part of the new core. The battery factory, when it comes online, they'll figure it out. And you have this dynamic aspect that you find in several of the technology companies. And if you look at Tesla, not as a car company, but a technology company, you realize that this is perfect sense. Go back to your company. Most companies stay here, focus here, and they do efficiencies, they do cost cut, they do lean, and they neglect to innovate upwards. So on that introduction, you have your new teams, you have your companies, you have your tools, you have your walls. Go to work on developing what we call a portfolio of business models for one of your chosen companies. If you are advanced users, you can map this out as a complete business model canvas. And you can do it in just a few minutes. If you're more intermediate or just getting started, stay with the big headlines. This is a revenue source, this is a revenue source, this is a revenue source, etc. Questions? Fantastic. Off you go.